It's come a long way in a short space of time, but more importantly, there's still so much further to go. And so, yeah, the game in general is in a good place at the moment, and just excited for the future.
Welcome to the Changing Room, where Royal London and the Lions are bringing you the conversations that matter. And today we'll be discussing how women's rugby has progressed over the years. I'll be joined by former England international Shauna Brown, former Ireland international Claire Malloy, and members of the Pontyclean Falcons. Shauna, welcome to Pontyclean. Let's get straight to it. What are the biggest changes you've seen in the women's game over the last number of years?
One would be professional contracts and also crowd sizes. So if we look at professional contracts, when I started playing for England, which wasn't that long ago, I was still working in the fire service, and that then was a big change for it to be a professional rugby player. Even for me to say it out loud, it took me a while to, when someone says, "Oh, what do you do for a living?" I'll say, "I play rugby," and then seeing their faces like, "Yeah, but what else?" I go, "No, I play rugby as a woman." So that was huge for us as England, and then set the tone for what's now coming through from the other home nations in terms of giving their girls professional contracts, because it's clear to see how much improvement you can make as a team if you just let your girls play full time.
The elevation of the game and the visibility over the last few years has just been massively transformative. Turning up the airport in the last few years of my career and people going, "That was a good game. Really like what you did," going through security and getting recognised. And the presence of women's rugby is just astronomical, the growth of it. And it's just brilliant to be a part of.
In terms of crowd sizes, I remember playing in Six Nations games at Doncaster in 2019, and we was buzzing that we filled 5,000 seater / standing at Doncaster nights. And so then looking forward to our Six Nations this year, England versus France at Twickenham already sold 40,000 tickets. So it's come a long way in a short space of time, but more importantly, there's still so much further to go. And so, yeah, the game in general is in a good place at the moment, and just excited for the future.
When I was young, I just used to watch my brothers play rugby. On the TV, it was the men's. I think since starting rugby myself, it's become a lot more popular. So that's really good to see. Premiership teams have separate pages for their men's and their women's rugby, and it's just so good because it shows that there's a reason for it.
What do you think some of the key drivers have been in terms of the development of the women's game in recent years?
I think it's the trailblazers, like the people I owe my game to, who started, in the early 90s, who got a team together, who played their first international against Scotland, the first ever women's international. Those women lay down the foundations. They knocked on doors that didn't want to be opened, and they really laid down the foundations and have represented us and really kind of driven the women's game forward.
Being a trailblazer doesn't come without challenges, but I wondered if you could talk me through maybe one of them in particular and how you've dealt with it.
I guess the challenges has come when I've spoken publicly about being a woman in sport and in rugby, and in particular being a person of colour and a woman in rugby. Like it's different, sometimes it's hard, but one of them in particular was, I think the headline was, "If I got pregnant tomorrow, I have no idea what my England contract looks like," something along those lines. I knew there was a whole context in the article, but I saw the headline, I was like, oh no, they're never going to ask me to do an interview again. But if somebody's asking me, is there an issue here, is there a problem here, it would be wrong for me to say no, and it would be wrong not only for me, but it wouldn't do the women's game justice and women in general justice.
So I'm just wondering, how important do you think the stakeholders and the support of the stakeholders, just how pivotal are they to be able to grow the sport?
I think it's massive, like the collective buy-in from the person who buys the ticket to come watch the game, the person working at the game, the sponsor, the TV company, the broadcasters, the unions. We need everyone to buy in and to show up. There's so much about women's sport that's empowering to a generation. It's a fantastic product. I think people are beginning to recognise it now, but we need to keep driving that forward to keep it being sustainable.
You have to have the belief from people who make these decisions that us as women, we are worthy, and then other people / brands or organisations, companies realise, oh, women are pretty decent at rugby, especially if you give them the chance to train full time. So it's getting other people to realise that you invest in a project like you would do in any other project in life, and you don't necessarily get your return straight away, but that's the whole point of investment. And when you're investing in humans, it's about having that belief in them as well.
Now there's so much more exposure, like you've got everything in England, you've got the big hype of obviously the World Cup just happening, and it's all been like the women's rugby are equally, is more exposure, if not the same in regards to the men's. So that's a big thing for me, is just how accessible and how much exposure it's been.
We've seen the women's game grow exponentially. What do you think the impact of the elite side of women's rugby has had on the grassroots level?
I think it's huge, like, to finally be able to kind of recognise household names in the women's game, everything that's been pushed into the sphere of women's sport in terms of, what we've seen in women's football and rugby now, that you need to be able to see your idols. You need to see people like you succeeding on an international stage. Yeah, I might be out in Pontyclean playing rugby, but I want to be the next Jazz Joyce in the Olympics. They think I'll go out and train on a pitch and that's where I want to aspire to be.
Well, it's safe to say that women's rugby has made major strides over the years. Make sure you tune in for episode 3 of The Changing Room, where we'll be discussing the future prospects of women's rugby. We'll see you soon.